We are probably going to run pretty much directly from this panel into the reading from 5 to 6 o'clock, because we've got a pretty hard stop on the evening at 6 o'clock, because we are getting it together, changing the room around for burlesque tonight. Some of you have super tickets. Some of you have already gotten your burlesque tickets. There is a 7 o'clock door, 7:30 showtime. No one is going to be turned away for lack of funds. So if you can squeeze in here tonight, you're welcome back. Please throw down some money to help the center if you can. As I will tell you in a second, money is good, at least in terms of keeping your spaces open. So I'd like to welcome everybody who knows they're going to be on the panel, and if you're not sure if you're on the panel or not, I'll keep an eye out and call you up here, okay? Right on. I see you, Tessa. You are transacting to keep a fantastic literary gem in the house. I mean, in the city. All right. Oh, we're coming in for a landing. I am so happy. Oh, I'm happy to see the newcomers come in the door. So, welcome to the last panel of our Sex Culture Expo, hashtag Sex Culture Expo. Center for Sex and Culture is at CENTR Sex Culture. And like the truly unprepared moderator that I have been all day long, I did not bring up anybody's bios with me, even though they were all super good and sent me stuff. So I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. But let me just start by saying, first, I apologize. I should have been more prepared. I'm totally sorry. Anyway, Ysenio does not want me to say I'm sorry for things like this. This is just, I was keeping my shit together as best I could, people. That's what happened. That's really just what happened. All right? So because we pulled this excellent situation out of our asses. We've been talking about it for a while, and then we pulled it out of our ass. And by we, I mainly mean me. So I am going to just start this off by saying that the Center for Sex and Culture is still in the space that it is because our rent only doubled. So that's good, because we thought it was going to triple. And as the people from downtown who were helping us said, well, that still is under market rate. So I think that really tells you all you need to know about the San Francisco alt-sex art community of the moment, right? I think that anecdote pretty much says everything it needs to say. And what I would love us to do on this panel, we've got about 45 minutes to kick around the question of sex community, gendered community, arts community, and particularly the intersections of those, as we've lived them and as we're living them now, and with maybe some thoughts about what it takes to maintain in this extraordinary city in a quake zone perched on the edge of a continent with a huge ocean attached, in a time when, as has happened over and over again in the city's history, things are changing. So I'm Carol Queen. That's all I'm probably going to say about it, at least until later on. I'm going to hand the mic down the road and ask each of you to introduce yourself and say what situates you here, and then we'll start talking about this topic.
I'm Allison Moon. I'm an author and sex educator. I live in Oakland with my partner, Reed. I think I'm on this panel because I'm a founding member of Camp Beaverton for Wayward Girls, which started out at Burning Man and has had a lot of sex-focused parties and whatnot, fundraisers usually, specifically for women, and it's always been trans-inclusive since the beginning. for women to get together and fuck, basically, among other things, sisterhood. And then also, my partner and I throw sex parties as well in our loft in Oakland. We've been doing it since we moved here about 8 years ago. And I'm also one of the hosts of Velvet, which is Mission Control's party for women and inclusive of the ecosystem of people who support women fucking women. And the next one is in October. We've been kind of trying to figure out how to model that, and it's been hard to try and get the women to the space. And so it's really important for us to kind of be visible about, hey, we're ladies who like to fuck ladies, and talk about it more often and frequently. So that's it.
Hi. My name is Tessa Wills, and I am an artist, and I've lived in San Francisco since 2009, but I also lived here for a couple of years at the end of the 90s and the early 2000s. And I've had like I feel very committed and in love with the city, even through the intense changes that are happening that make it quite a struggle. I run a festival of performance about desire called This Is What I Want. I've artistically directed it since 2012, and this year will be its 8th year. In that festival, we look at desire through various different socio-political lenses, and there's a very strong queer focus and a very strong focus on sex work and sex workers' output. And then I also have my private practice, which is often like one-on-one durational performances, which are like quite subtle and quiet and quite the opposite of what normally happens in the festival, which is quite often out there and loud. I have a lot to say on this subject, so I'm excited to be up here talking with my colleagues.
Hi there, I'm Dorian Katz, and I'm a visual artist and curator, and I'm also the curator of art at the Center for Sex and Culture. I went back to school late at 40, and when I was in school for art, a lot of my professors told me that they thought I was brave, which I was basically just making art about sex and queer sex, and within our community, it's not considered brave, it's just considered doing your work. But it made me realize that I was an outsider there, and that there weren't going to be the same kind of opportunities for me and my work as there were for my classmates making work about just about anything that wasn't sex. So when I finished school, I had the opportunity to along with keeping up with my own practice, to begin curating here. And to me, it's very important to make opportunities for artists who make intelligent work about sexuality and gender, and for them to have a place to have solo shows, group shows, develop pieces of their career, be properly curated, as well as, and in addition to that, we also show historical items from our archive and from the archives and personal collections of other people to give it a historical context, and to just show the relevance of art about sexuality, and especially about outsider and marginalized experience.
Hi, my name is Juliana Algado Lopera, and I'm a writer. I am a literary drag queen. I couldn't do my face today because it takes 3 hours and I had no time. I am also the director of Radar Productions, which is a queer literary and arts nonprofit here in the city. Just to give you a little bit of context, this morning I was doing Drag Queen Story Hour, where drag queens read stories to little kids. So I wasn't doing my face, but I was doing the kids' faces. And I am also a curator at the GLBT Museum. I'm curating a show right now on LGBT Latino history in here. So I do a lot of stuff around literature, arts, drag, Latino stuff, and that's why I'm here, I guess. Yeah.
So, what's up now with sex, arts, culture, space in San Francisco, and what impact do you see it having on the city and the communities within which you move?
I can start. I think that I can speak both sort of like as Radar as an organization and as Juliana, just sort of like navigating those spaces. As Radar, a lot of our audience just moved, right? Like a lot of our audience were a lot of like low income queer people, and a lot of those people had to move. So it's been a challenge and a creative challenge, I think, also to try to create programming that is relevant with what's happening right now and trying to keep it fresh. I think that a lot of young people in the city are very jaded and just sort of like feel like hopeless. Like there's I was listening to the panel before, and it feels like a lot of people that are in their 20s are just like, it passed us. Like we have nothing to do anymore here. And I think that that's really the challenge, is that people think that there was a better time before, and now it's sort of like we just got to arrive too late to the party, basically, and there's nothing else to do. So it is a challenge, but what I'm finding is that in order for us to stay afloat, we have to collaborate a lot, basically. And that's where the community comes in. As for Radar, what we're doing a lot is just collaborations, bringing in other people, tuning in to what is relevant to the community right now. I think that a lot of stuff around gentrification, history, Black Lives Matter, trans people is really relevant right now, and sort of like tuning into the community needs, but definitely collaborating and reaching out to other groups and other organizations to see what they're doing and how can we join forces. I think like that's basically at the premise of what we're doing right now. And trying to get some of that tech money. If anybody has any idea, please reach out to me, because I want to get some of that tech money for my people. And as Juliana, what I'm seeing is also a lot of going back to the underground. Like a lot of parties in houses, a lot of parties in people's backyards, a lot of readings in people's backyards, a lot of, like a lot of things that maybe were before in the public sphere are now going again into like the basement, basically. So I am going to a lot of like parties and readings and gatherings that are not taking, you're not taking up public space. The other thing is there's this division between sort of like the gay movement and the queer movement, as I see it, which is a lot of a lot of my friends, and then some of the people that go to Radar don't identify with, say, the gays from the Castro. And, some of the legislation that gets passed may not be relevant to some people, to like trans people or people of color. Like it just may not be relevant. And those are sort of like the people those are our audience, and those are also my friends. And so there's division, this frustration, because it feels like the gays are all right, but the gays are not all right. Some gays are all right, not everybody else. And so I think that is that this limbo that we're in right now as to loss of space, the loss of this identity, which seemed very unified around gayness or whatever, queerness, that is not there anymore. We're not very unified around that. And how to do that. What I tell people every time I'm in events, I'm like, guys, in 15 years, when there's someone in Berkeley doing a PhD on the history of San Francisco, they're going to look at us. They're going to see these are the people that made it happen during that time. This was what's happening in like the underground or whatever. I'm also telling them, like, this is the only place to cruise. Like, where else are you going to cruise in San Francisco? Just come to our readings, That's how I sell it. And I mean, if you don't come for the literature, at least come for the sex. So it is. I think it's a lot of like being really, really creative in taking space that may not be visible, that it's not public. We're not in the public eye anymore. You don't see dykes walking around the same way that you used to before, but you kind of have to look for it and go into people's basements and go into an attic and go into like someone's apartment. That's where things are happening, I think.
Sure. So I'm having a lot of conflicting thoughts, but one of the things that keeps on coming to mind is kind of space as literal and space as metaphorical, and the idea of taking up space as a disenfranchised person or people in any way, at the same time, like the privilege of being able to own one space, like literally own one space, which is the kind of the hard part right now with the shifting of the city, is in any sort of gentrification, the people who own can profit, quite literally. And the people who do not are the ones who feel like now we're either struggling to maintain a really good relationship with our landlords, or we're looking at, Craigslist farther and farther and farther out from the city that born us in different ways. And I think also what you spoke to, I think, is really interesting about the notion of like inclusivity versus exclusivity. Who gets to claim a certain space in a certain way? And queer community, kind of capital Q, capital C, means some things. And at the same time, the notion of being able to claim safe spaces for your affinity group within queer or within whatever your group is, and how you define those boundaries as well. And I think that, the notion of wanting to claim like radical fairy space and feel like you need to reassert the boundaries when the boundaries get wishy-washy, and feeling like maybe the space isn't for you anymore, or space to heal, space to be away from the male gaze or away from the white gaze or whatever that is. And how do you claim that space while at the same time acknowledging that we're all struggling to find our space as artists, as queers, in a city that is constantly kind of pushing back against our right to take that space up. So those are no solutions, just a lot of conflicting thoughts that I'm having about that.
Thanks. I want, by way of illustration, to talk about a piece that I made here in this building in 2012. Which was, I think this building was probably the only place that I could have made this kind of work and been supported by the geography of the space, but also by the principles that underpin the building in general, and the fact that it's in San Francisco. And it was a performance about desire. And what happened was you came in at the door there, and you were met by a host, and then you went through a process where you would get, basically you would have like 20 minutes with a sex worker who was in the space. So we had 10 sex workers in the space, divided by like small curtains. And the sort of apex, it wasn't like a whorehouse. It wasn't exactly not a whorehouse. But it wasn't a whorehouse, it was actually like an art piece. And so that critical, anyway, I'm just trying to say so many things at once. So then what happened was there's like various other processes which are like sort of aesthetic and also conversational. And then you finally have like your 20 minutes, which is basically a one-on-one performance with a provider. And in that time, at some point, you'll be asked, what is it that you really want? And then you may or may not get that. And then afterwards, there's a sort of like chill out decompression space, which was just here actually, and then people sort of went on their way. So it was about an hour that the whole performance took. We priced it at like $15, I think, or something like that. And it was definitely, I think what I'm really interested in this piece is like, it's just useful to think about as a sort of marker in terms of like how we funded that piece and how we found space for that piece. So as I said, this was definitely the only space that we really managed to find to do that work, because like, yeah, legally it could have been problematic, I think. And financially, basically, often when there's like big or more ambitious pieces like that happen in the festival, because that piece, like it was like a durational piece, so it's like 6 or 7 hours, and it had like 15 performers in it if you include the providers. So there's 10 providers and then 5 other people working, and then also like another 10 volunteers working. So that's a lot of like young, amazing, very talented queers and sex workers working for like, that ticket money is not going to cover that, It's also not going to cover like the space for the Center for Sex and Culture. So there's a lot of like goodwill, there's a lot of like basically artists working for like very low cost or free. And then there's a lot of basically like private income, which is basically like interpersonal relationships with tech people, which is basically like ends up being quite often emotional labor or sex work, which is the main way that we have found like works to get that channel of money flowing, like between these communities and subcultures and the constant work that we're making on the edges of culture, and to get those like financed economically. And I feel like, like in San Francisco and perhaps in America, like because I've lived, because we're talking about the geography so much, I guess I'm also wanting to like put it in a bit of perspective from other places. It just seems very clear that this kind of work. I've also talked about this piece in academic institutions, and the question that always comes is, I'm sure, a question that you get asked a lot, which is like, how is it art if it's got sex in it? Like, are you sure it's not just sex? Like, you know, that it's like constant. It's quite a boring question that I spend a lot of time like trying to answer, or trying to like not answer or whatever. But so I think that. Well, just like in other countries and other places that I've lived, the whole arts world is funded a little differently, so that it's not that it's like super easy anywhere in the world to fund work that has explicit erotic content. But it may be that there is like more permissiveness around arts in general. Maybe, I mean, it's all changing everywhere, obviously, but like in Central Europe, for example, when I was living there, like for the first 5 years, it would have been much easier to get money for this kind of work. And there's also just the spaces were different also. So it wouldn't rely so much on philanthropy. It would be more like government funding that would be available to support artists working in this kind of way. Because I've been often asked to tour that piece other places, but ethically I can't do that again. Like I can't just take that much resource from my community, even though the work is amazing and people still talk about that piece, like, oh, remember that piece? Like, which is like great, but at the moment, the piece has to, until we can like unlock a different kind of like economic model around it, the piece just has to exist in that sort of like almost that dream space that you were just referencing of like, oh, do you remember when that piece happened? It was like so great, and oh, I hope we can do that again, you know. And when I first got, sorry, okay, maybe I'm talking too much. Let someone else talk.
Okay, so I'm gonna go in a couple of different directions. First, I want to say we're in this great position at CSC in that we are an actual brick and mortar place with the wall for a gallery, with the stage, with mics. So I hope you all know that you're welcome here. If you have an idea for an event you want to see, think of this as your glorified attic and basement. Come here, make it happen. Your sex party, your arts event, all of it is welcome. And frankly, there's not enough bandwidth for us to make it happen all the time without you. So come. And let me at least have one other direction now after that. I think well, I also wanted to say that I don't think there ever was a time where we were all unified. I think, you know, like I think about when I was coming up and we very much identified with the term dyke at that time. And also the joke was, what's the difference between a dyke and a lesbian? And the answer was $20,000 a year. And so that's tells you something about that. And I wish it was a funnier joke, but that was the joke. And then I'm glad to hear that life and the arts is finding a way. You know, it used to be easier, like in the 80s or even in the 90s to, you know, rent a small storefront and turn that into a gallery kind of community space venture. Now it's a lot harder to do that. So it's wonderful that at least there are backyards where you can do it and attics, and that we must keep pushing and supporting the spaces that exist and pushing for more, demanding more, and coming together.
Can I say one last thing about that? Because I think that something that we didn't touch upon was the internet. And I think that the internet has provided a lot of space where there's no space for a lot of people. definitely there's all these apps which we may or may not engage with them, but they're still there. And Facebook, in its like fucked upness anyway, has made people here have created all these different groups where they connect sexually and artistically. And I have found community in the internet where afterwards it's translated into like an actual space community, right? Where we organize things there. I have met many people. I've collaborated with people over the internet, both on Facebook and Instagram and like other places that like wouldn't have happened. So I think that a lot of the invisibility is happening also in the internet. And you know, I guess the challenge is like how do we replicate that like in real life so it doesn't only stay online. But I do think that a lot of us are doing that work, and I think that the internet has provided a space for a lot of displaced people and a lot of people who cannot engage in the same way. So I think the internet is huge right now.
I'm wondering if you would all talk just a little bit about how you draw who you draw still, to see either your individual work or the work of your space or organization, however that question lands for you. And do you think we've got untapped audience in San Francisco? What do you think the near-ish future holds for these questions? That's my follow-up question, and then we'll see if there's anybody in the room who wants to ask us to go in other directions. How do you find who you find? What's the near future hold, do you think?
I'm going to skip the first part of that question for a second. I think that when you look at the way San Francisco's demographics are changing, for better and for worse, there's a huge influx of young people. And that influx of young people probably has more money than ever before, has a very white profile, a very male profile, and at the same time, I find that there's this notion of like how the internet has everything at a keystroke also creates this notion that we don't need spaces anymore, or we don't need to congregate in ways because being queer is okay now, or whatever. So I think that there is this probably, I expect to see more people congregating in meet space once they realize that actually it's still pretty hard to be fringe in any way. And actually your public school sex education probably failed you in a million ways if it existed at all. And I've noticed like at sex parties that you've thrown here, where it would kind of be more of like a exploration thing, very kind of sweet and light and kind of just pushing the edges of the little baby who just got off the bus, who just got here for their job at Twitter. And who has never really explored any of the sex culture. I find these little minds are blowing all over the place, and I see that still happens. And so even though we can access any kind of porn we want to very easily, there's still something revolutionary that happens when people are in a space where people are fucking and loving it. And so I think that gives me hope. Again, I'm a cynic at the same time, but that gives me hope. To answer your first question, I think enthusiasm helps. I think being very real about your humanness helps in terms of saying, like, I kickstarted Girl Sex 101. It was a very successful Kickstarter, and I loved Kickstarter because it allowed people to see the transparent experience of making art and the challenges of making art. Like, hey, I need to raise $12,000 for this book to even happen because I'm paying everyone who's writing for me. Because fuck you, pay me, and fuck you, I'm paying my friends. And that's a huge problem with capitalism and art. When you start mushing them together, it becomes very complicated. And I just have a very deep value of art. You should pay people for their expertise. So making that clear, and then inviting people who had really great followings to be in the book, which was very helpful. Like, Jizz Lee's fans, holy shit, those people really like Jizz. And that really helps. And so collaborating allowed me to find other audiences that loved the people who were writing for me. And then they were able to, find all of these other cool people that they may not have heard of before. And that allowed for a lot more experience. And then again, like just being transparent, like, hey, these are the challenges I'm dealing with. Hey, like rent is expensive. Hey, writing things are, you should get paid for the books that you write or the art that you generate in the world. And saying that over and over again, sometimes I've alienated people for saying like, hey, no, please buy my book. Or even go to the library and ask for the book there because somebody has to buy it for it to show up at the library. But just to acknowledge that these are the real challenges of being an artist in modern society, where it's easy to pirate my stuff, but please don't. Because that helps, keep these communities alive.
I would say that I've like split myself and gone in two different directions. In my personal practice, I find that there's an increasing pressure to be able to reduce your ideas and your practice to one very like succinct, inviting, and hard-hitting like tagline that you can maybe make a 30-second video about and put on social media, and then gather your audience like an economy that way, kind of, that then translates to tickets. And I increasingly like pushing. I just basically over the last 3 years just have come to like fuck that, like fuck you, and like fuck that process. So I'm not going to let that touch. I mean, I'm not going to let that totally take over my whole art practice. It's not that it's not touching it, but I'm not going to let it run the whole thing. So I actually have started doing this project called the Hermit Project, where it's just performances that happen in private or performances that happen in intimate spaces and exchanges between individuals. So that's one way that I've gone. And also like the ideas around it are kind of like complicated and don't really like boil down to some awesome like one single sentence situation. And you kind of need to like invest and hang out with it. It's like performances that people do in private. Sometimes I give them scores and they go away and do it. Or anyway, so that in some way is like a site of resistance. Obviously, I'm not making any money from that. I also like run this festival and have a responsibility I'm an artist that runs the festival, but also to the degree that I'm producing it, I have a responsibility to make some money. So I also have to definitely engage and succeed in that way of making money so that I can pay people. So in that way, I would say that my immediate community that is around the festival and the work has definitely been decimated by the gentrification apocalypse in the same way that you were articulating. And I haven't totally found a way around that yet. But I have found I cultivate tech people and people from like other communities that I don't immediately identify with so strongly, like the Burning Man community. Like those people often have a sort of interest in sex and sexuality, of course, because it has a sort of like edge or an intrigue to it. And so I sort of like play on that and try to be quite strategic with finding money and finding audiences and programming directly to those people, and then trying to be strategic with the way that I use the money to support the work in other ways. But it's a puzzle that I haven't totally sorted out yet. And yeah, I'm still sort of, I feel like the city is in such transition around it, and the dichotomy between the people that are tech people and the art people is like so, or the sex people is like so strong that it's not finished yet, is what I think. Like something else is going to happen next, and at that point it'll be a little easier to figure out how to make the bridge or how to break the bridge or how to mix it all up or some other non-bridge metaphor.
So as a visual artist, I know that 1% of all visual artists actually make a full living off of their work. So going with that is, it's pretty hard. I'd say that because of the content of my work, it's been easier for me to get my work out there by making zines and beginning to do a little bit of comics. And I'd say the queer zine and comics community is, it's a lot easier. I think too, you can make sales and get your work out there because it's really affordable. And it's also affordable to the people I want it to reach more too. So I really like that. And then I'd say that we have been able to make quite a bit of sales in group shows here. and it's often surprised me, but it'll be work that's in the $200 and under range, and also in the $500 and under, we've done pretty well too, and that people do want to buy art. They want, artist multiples, prints, photographs, originals. People, regular folk, want to buy it, and it just has to be not 4 months plus rent, obviously. So we are able to find that here and make some, many artists. I've made quite a few first sales for people, which is always really exciting. I'd say, as far as, I guess, getting the word out about events, we kind of do all the normal, get it into this online site by their deadline and the other one, and nothing extraordinary or special beyond that. And I should probably take some time to think about ways we can revamp that and reach a wider audience. I'd also say, as I'm in my late 40s now, but I was back in school in my early 40s, that I was so impressed with the undergrads, the young people who are now out in the world doing all kinds of things, and that we just need to find them because they're so interested. They're interested in all aspects of history as well as art things going on now. So I just got to keep searching until we find more of them.
I think to the question of how to draw people in or where, I guess it's twofold. One, I go to a ton of stuff. Generally, I'm always out, and if it's genuine my interest in people, and I just talk to people as much as I can, introduce myself, and I always have the collaborator sort of thing on always. The internet, I love the internet. And when it comes to radar, I think it's a twofold thing. I think we do. And I do have this sell it pitch of how to get to people in 1 second, but it's twofold. It's to me, it's I got you, and then there's all these other things that are deeper. So definitely a lot of attention to aesthetics, because now that's the online thing. And it is sad that it is a little bit reduced, but I think that to me, I look at it as sort of a layer thing. Is here's how you come into our door, but then you stay for all of these really deep things, right? So you come through our door through this one thing that you saw that was pretty, but then you stayed for all these other things or magical things that are happening. And so that's how I try to look at bringing people in right now. And the untapped, I think probably the young techies that are here, I don't think that everybody's bad. I don't think that everybody's so irresponsible. Maybe, I don't know. I want to trust people and believe in the goodness of their heart. And there are still a lot of young people that are moving here for some reason. I don't know if they just did not hear the news. San Francisco's really expensive. But I still meet people that are I just moved to Oakland. I just moved to San Francisco. It's where are you living? And they're broke artists too. So there's this, and I think that we are not paying attention to them because people don't think that that's happening, but it is happening. I've run into them at reader events. I just moved here. Really? I'm walking at this coffee shop. I'm living in this anarchist house in 16th Street. I'm really? That exists? It does exist. It does exist. There's anarchist houses here still, and we don't even know. So there are a lot. I think it's just more of just having an open heart and talking to people all the time and having sort of collaborator in my head of ways that we can build community together always.
That is what I hoped that we would do with this panel, because of course we've all worked together in varying ways, the lot of us in multiple ways, and with many of you as well. We've got very little time for Q&A, but is there anyone here who wants to engage with these ideas with us for a little bit before we move on? Greta. Holler and I will repeat you.
So there's something a couple of you talked about, and I'm sorry, I'm terrible with names, so I don't remember who said what. You were talking about that sense that young people, young artists have now, that they missed the boat. That, that there used to be the glory days in the past when everything was awesome, and now it's just all terrible. And yet, at the same time, you were talking about how in 20 years, people are going to be looking at this time and saying something about how we missed the boat. And the sense of it was better then, that's a theme throughout San Francisco history. It was better in the beatnik days. It was better in the hippie days. It was better in the freewheeling 70s. It was better when Queer Nation was around. How can we communicate to up-and-coming people that sense of having missed the boat is part of the history and that we have to make our own boat?
Do you want to? No. She doesn't. I mean, I think that we just have to keep repeating the narrative. I think that the narrative about being jaded is just because it's been over and over and over. And I think social media makes everything worse. Maybe before people knew that it was like, okay, before it was better, but you didn't have Facebook reminding you every 5 seconds that it was better, And so I think that has everything to do with it. People open up, and it's rare. Like dog-eared books open in the customers. Like, there's one bookstore opening in San Francisco again, And so you have one good news, but I think a lot of it has to do with social media, to be honest, because it's that's what young people are connected to, and the narratives around San Francisco is it's expensive, everybody's moving out, So I think it's a lot of putting that narrative out there again. I repeat that in all my events. Always. I'm just you guys are going to study us. Smile for that picture because you're going to be in somebody's dissertation, So it's just about putting it out there and reiterating, and it will be part of the narrative as a whole. I totally agree with you, and I do think that there are wonderful things happening in the city, and I think that there are amazing artists doing incredible work right now. But again, I do think that social media, because it's so much, and that's the dominant narrative right now around San Francisco, is that there's nothing for artists. It gets just put out there, and that's what we listen to, and that's what we hold on to.
I think it's much easier to join a movement that's already happening than to create one. And so I think many people kind of come hoping to join the thing that's kind of already 5 years too late. But I also know that there are some young artists with some hustle. I mean, I met a muralist who's came here and was like, I'm going to get that Google money. I'm going to get it. I'm going to wine and dine and schmooze every fucker that I know who's ever set foot on the Google campus until Google gives me money to do a beautiful mural. And guess what? He got that money and a lot of other startup money, right? Because the hustle. And so, I mean, I think that it's that you have to fucking make something. And again, the big critique is it's much easier to critique somebody else's work than it is to make your own fucking work. So to the degree we can keep banging the drum of make some shit and share it with the world is the drum that we have to keep on reminding people. You have to make stuff and invite people to enjoy it with you.
I would add to that the Center for Sex and Culture has several different things that we do on a regular or a semi-regular basis about bringing people together to make work. So I think that it's worth saying on the heels of that, Allie, that every month we do an erotic reading circle for people who just wrote some shit on a napkin at the bar or people who are working on their magnum opus or both. We do every month, except when we preempt it like we did this week, the sex workers writing workshop. We do an occasional, I think it's going to be bi-monthly or quarterly, I'm not sure what, but Tarts and Crafts, where we get together and make artwork together. So those are all things that can be shared by people who are identified as artists or who are identified as being attracted to creating, no matter where you are on that continuum. And I really think that this continuum is an important one because if you feel too disenfranchised about the reason that you just said, which is that it all already happened, what the fuck, or that there's not enough here for us to create a life around. I mean, artists mostly have to get used to the fact, as Dorian said, that most of us don't make our 100% living making creative work. So until we can change the whole culture to move better in that direction, I think making community around work and making the work you want to make and being seen for making work and having the emotional experience that creativity brings are, I mean, they might be sloppy seconds, all those things, but they're not bad. You know, they're not bad. A lot of people don't get a voice in our culture. And if we've made enough space for diverse coming together for art making and for art appreciation, art, literature, whatever we're talking about, or having sex together, which is a form of creativity, because you gotta have some fucking social skills to have some fucking sex together in a group, don't you? And if you don't have any social skills, it's one way to get some. I just want to point that out. Works for almost everyone. And so those are the things that I think about when I think about this as a challenge. Because I'm sure that there have been plenty of people at plenty of times in the city's history who've gone, oh, shit, I can't even stay here. It's changing too much. Oh, I can't afford it. Of course, that's happened over and over again. And we can't allow ourselves to believe that this is the end of times.
Can I just say one thing to that, exactly what you're saying? I'm doing the Latino LGBT history exhibit at the GLBT Museum. And when I look back and I was like, there was always a queer Latino arts group. And now I'm like, there's nothing. What do? I get my Puerto Rican homeboy. I'm like, we have to make something. We gather a bunch of us, and then we just throw a party at his house, and we get drunk, and we start planning some art stuff. Like, that was it. And now we have a Facebook group, and we communicate through that. And every time one of us has like a performance rehearsal, blah, 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 we invite the other one. And this is how we're like creating that sort of like, we didn't have a queer Latino collective. Let's just make one right now in your house, right now. Get the tequila out. That's what we're doing. So that's basically it. Just to both of your points is like, okay, well, but I have organizational skills though. So.
And let's hear it for that. I think that we are out of time for this panel, which is really too bad because, as usual, we could talk for hours. But we wanted to make some art visible to you all right now. Art about sex, sex art, literature, just right now, in front of your very eyes. And then everybody has to split for an hour or stay and help, one or the other. And then you come back, and there's going to be more art tonight, performance and literature. So that's what we're going to do now. Let's take 5. Some of you are newcomers in the door, restrooms, lobby to the left. A few of you are like, this is my last chance to grab one of Susie Q's books. Maybe it is. There she is right there. But you can still come to Good Vibrations tomorrow afternoon, 4 to 6 o'clock. Good Vibrations, Polk Street, Susie Q book party if you haven't gotten enough of that. We are all either here with our work or the work is sort of floating around us all the time. Make connections with us if you don't already know all the people who are here. This is where community starts. And we pulled this together too fast for the room to be completely full. But I have every trust that every single one of us here has links to people out there in the community, including those fucking newcomers that we want to attract here. Tell them about it. Because if they think they came to San Francisco for a job, they will find that they came to San Francisco for an adventure. I guarantee it. It happens to all of us. Thank you, panel. That was amazing. In 5 minutes, I'm going to call you back, and I'm going to get with my writers in a second, and we're going to introduce them, and we're going to have a little reading. Okay. This is Carol, and she didn't have any food today. Yeah, I'll make that clear. I just want to note that we are going to have those people who brought books to sign, once they've read, go back over to the table back there, FYI. So we'll do that. And if you are shopping for books, etc., while the reading is going on, please just whisper. Thank you. And I want to thank everybody again for being here. I'll call the first reader up in just a little tiny bit.